Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. So this is it. This is the last talk of Product Design Day and Programmers Week. I'm assuming they probably put this best for last, which is why I'm last, but I'm going to pretend that that's true. Maybe it's not, maybe it is, whatever. But yeah, thank you for joining either way. I am really happy to be here. This is actually my second talk in Programmers Week. I did a talk last year, and that was on soft skills and how to be an effective designer. And this year, I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a different approach and take a step back and look at the designer's role within the product design world. So that kind of comes to the topic of my talk this year, which is what's in a name. And then speaking of what's in a name, my name is Thary, and I am a lead product designer and community design manager in the Vancouver studio. I am part of a team of about 12 product designers currently, and we are only growing, which is kind of why I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of the designer, the role of the product designer, and kind of dive a little bit into it in more detail. And as I was going through the process of this, building out this talk, I realized that I've actually been in the design industry for about 15 years. So I've been a working professional pretty much for 15 years. And of those 15 years, 10 of those years have been within the product and digital space. So I've gone through a lot of roles. I've gone through a lot of different companies as well. And I've really seen the industry change quite a bit. It's also kind of crazy how much time flies and how quickly things go by. And in that time, I've really got to see the evolution of the role of the designer. So when we think about when I think about when I first started, there was a lot of questions and kind of a little bit of an elusiveness to the role of the UX designer or the product designer. In fact, I don't even think that the role of product designer was really quite a thing back then. And there, in my experience, there's been kind of a lot of assumptions about what the designer what the designer role is. And that's sort of how I wanted to frame this talk, is to think about those assumptions that people have about creatives, about designers, and talk through them and kind of get through the topics and kind of explore what our responsibilities are, talk about a little bit of what the different types of designers and the different types of roles there are. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be able to kind of get a sense of what we do and how we do it. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of where this was going. Obviously, this is sort of within the experience of my own career. And I, just want to caveat that, the roles themselves can be very different from one place to another. But I want to kind of look at it from a more general approach, a more kind of broad approach, and then kind of go from there. So let's start with assumptions. That's kind of where I want to kind of outline some of the assumptions that I've heard about designers over my career. And then the first one being that, designers just make things look pretty. And I'm not going to dive into every single one of these right now, but we'll go through the talk, and hopefully by the end of it, we'll know if it's true or false. The second one is, we don't need a designer. Our developer can design and code at the same time. This one I've heard a few times in the product space, and is something that we'll talk about later on. The next one is, whether you're hiring a UX designer, UI designer, product designer, they all kind of do the same thing. That's kind of been something I've heard a few times. It's also been kind of how people approach hiring or looking at hiring. They don't quite know which types of designers are appropriate to bring into the team. So we'll talk about that as well. And then, designers just kind of slow things down. I've heard this one. There's often time constraints and the need to launch things quickly. And then a lot of the times people think that the designers kind of bring in a lot of process, bring in a lot of extra kind of pieces that may or may not be valuable to the actual product launch. So I've heard this, and I think we definitely need to address that one. This line is designers have all the answers to things, and this kind of stems from some of the interactions I've had in teams where designers, they do come kind of with a tool set, and they do come with certain abilities to kind of dive into to get answers. And sometimes it becomes an illusion that designers are just the person to go to for everything, when maybe yes or no, they might be true or might not be true. And then this one is all designers care about are the users. So sometimes designers can be very passionate about things. Sometimes we are highly focused. And I hear people kind of talk a lot about like, oh, they don't care about the business. They don't care about development. All they care about are the users. And it's not just about the users. So this one we'll talk about as well. And then the last one, which I think maybe you've heard of this, maybe not, but designers are these like sensitive magical unicorns that need constant reassurance and support from others, because deep down they're super insecure and afraid people will just think they're making all of this up. So this is an assumption, or maybe it's a statement, I don't know, but by the end of it, we'll figure out whether it's true or false. So yeah, this is kind of how I wanted to frame the talk, or think about what you'll get out of the talk, is to address some of these assumptions. And a little bit is self-serving in the sense that I want to make it that engaging and bringing designers in becomes something that is not a question of value, or that you understand the value of a designer and what they can bring. And that's why I wanted to kind of, it is sort of our role as designers to educate in our process and talk about what we do, so that you do understand a little bit more about the exercises and the thinking behind some of our approach. So before we jump into the roles, I think it's important to talk about what is product design. So if we break it down, there is the product piece and then there is the design piece. So when we talk about products, there are three types of products really that designers kind of address. The first one is really the physical products. Those are like chairs, keyboards, lamps, things that typically don't have interfaces on them. And historically, the type of designer that deals with physical products or objects are industrial designers. So industrial designers will focus on the form, the ergonomics, tactility, as well as like the manufacturability of a object or tool. And then the next one we talk about is the digital designer. And this is really where we're going to focus on, seeing as it's Programmers Week. But yeah, these product designers will look at the types of apps, websites, software. And really they're diving into the experience, the flows, the visual design, as well as the overall digital usability of that product. And then the last piece is the kind of hybrid product. This is becoming more and more prevalent in our society, within our lives, just because computers are everywhere and they are pretty much integrated with almost everything that we touch nowadays. So when we talk about hybrid products, we're talking about IoT devices, wearables, even cars. So cars are highly, majority of them are built on computers and systems. And it's really that relationship between the interface and the physical tool is what we're looking at when we talk about hybrid space. I think that's really an interesting space to explore too, but that's a whole other topic. So these are the three types of products that we're dealing with. And on the other side of that, like, what is design? So this is a very existential question for designers, I believe, but if we kind of funnel it down, design is really about intent. The definition of design itself is a plan or drawing produced to show the look and function or workings of a building, garment, or other objects built or made. But if we take a look at more of the design versus art versus whatever else, to me, design is about understanding, is about intent. It's about building something with purpose, building something that addresses some sort of problem or need for customers or users or anyone really. But it's also the piece of designing something that is not solely for yourself, but is meant to be used by other people. So when we're designing, we're problem solving, and we're also creating with a purpose for something to be used, or for something to be what's that word, kind of engaged with, or yeah, something that's made to be engaged with. So when we put them together, what is product design? The process of ideating, creating, iterating on products that solve user problems or needs. So we're talking about process. And then what is the role of the designer in that? The product designer attempt to solve kind of real problems for real people by using this design thinking approach to gather knowledge of their prospective customers, habits, and behaviors so that they can anticipate their needs and wants. So that's high level what product design is, as well as what the role of the designer is. So let's just call it a day and then we're done. Just kidding, I've got like 20 more minutes to go. But the thing to focus on is that whether you're designing for a physical product or a digital product, you're always thinking about it from a design thinking process. And that's where the designers kind of, they flourish, and that's where their value kind of comes in. They have the tools and the skills to practice this process. And if we look at the product design process, which we kind of break down in Cognizant Softvision, is we look at it from a discovery, definition, design, and then delivery perspective. And then when we think about it from the design thinking process, it pretty much aligns with the same sort of journey. We're talking about empathizing, defining, ideating, building, and then testing. So this process is a key component of what it means to do product design. And then really the role of the designer is to facilitate each of these steps so that we can get to the delivery piece. But within the product design roles, there's actually a few different types of roles. So I did a very scientific method of figuring out which are the most in-demand roles within the industry right now. And I did that by searching LinkedIn and also just exploring some job boards of Google, Microsoft, as well as Amazon. And the top 4 roles that really come up a lot are the product designer role, the UX designer role, the UI designer role, and then the interaction designer role. There are other roles within design as well that should be considered and should be part of your team, but we're going to focus more on the actual production of the design or the process of producing design, not so much the like marketing and the other pieces of it, of research and marketing and those pieces, because there are specific designers for those as well. But we'll focus on these. And it's really interesting to kind of see that in comparison to the product designer role versus the other 3 roles within LinkedIn right now, it's almost 4 times as many the open roles for product designer. And that really kind of gauges the question of what are the skills of the product designer that are making them in demand, and what skills should you be looking for to bring into your own teams? I think part of the reason why this role of product designer has become more prevalent is that the industry is maturing and they're understanding more about what is needed to build a successful product. And we'll double click into these roles and talk about kind of the individual skills and responsibilities of each of them. But I think it's important to kind of see that evolution, because originally, actually, our design team were mostly called UX designers, and we have a lot of variable roles within Cognizant Softvision around the design space, which kind of speaks to the importance of defining what exactly these responsibilities and these roles are. We used to be called UX UI designers, who are kind of a combination of both. And then the product designer is really that. It's combining these two roles, combining these three roles, and then turning it into a bit more of a holistic role. But let's jump into the actual individual roles. So when we talk about UX designers, we're talking about what do they do? They're foundational. So UX designers, they are focused on the flows, they're focused on the personas, the journeys, the wireframing. When you think about the type of problem they're trying to solve, it's the experience. They are looking at it from end to end. They're trying to understand and make sure that we are accounted for, that the core of what we're solving for is there. And that's the purpose of the UX designer. That when we look at the UI designer, they are looking more at appearances. So their responsibilities are high fidelity designs, design systems. They're really about building out sustainable design systems, style guides, pattern libraries, as well as kind of the visual direction. And the practice of a UI designer is really about solving the visual design experience. So they're problem solving through visual design, versus UX designers are problem solving through more of that foundational flows, quick iterations of wireframes, making sure that things make sense. And then when we move into the interaction designers, they're looking at more of the tactility. They're looking at prototyping, micro animations. It's a lot of the interaction designers are kind of, their roles with the UX designers are kind of connected. And sometimes they kind of touch on each other's responsibilities, but I find that the interaction designer, their skill sets is really taking what the UX and UI designer has done and elevating it to an even more, giving that extra 5% that makes it like a top-notch experience. So then when we look at the product designers, they are more of a generalist. So they are taking all of the above and they are building in that holistic experience. They are taking and making sure that the needs of the UX also hit what the UI designers need and what the interaction designers are kind of filling in for. So they'll take all aspects of it and they'll align that to the customer and business objectives. And they work very much hand in hand with the product owner to make sure that through each step of the product design process that we address things properly. And they come with the tools and processes to help define and scope and build the product. So when we're looking at building out a team and making sure that you have the right skills and the right designers in the right place, there's definitely a pros and cons to having specialty designers like UX, UI, interactions versus a product designer. And I don't want to say that these roles are mutually exclusive, because they are not. They actually kind of blend into each other quite a bit. But if we're looking at the value of having specialist designers, it's really that they're deep diving. They are good at what they do. They only focus on those particular tasks, and you are able to create a more in-depth solution to that particular area. Versus if you have a generalist, generalists, they have a bit of skill from everything. So there's not a lot of deep dive. They are aware and are probably pretty well versed in each of these areas, except they sometimes don't have the time and the ability to kind of go into the same level of efforts as if you were to have individual designers for each. They have a broader knowledge of skills which help to support each of the steps within the process. but really they're playing more of like a lead role, and they're playing more of a senior kind of overlooking things and making sure that things are done properly and that things are consistent. So when we look at the process, some of the activities that we go through in this process, from kind of vision to ideation, kind of hits that same method of convergence and divergence. And the role of the designer is to really help to facilitate this process. We will kind of participate in the discovery piece of it, and we'll also kind of support it and bring in the types of workshops needed to do that. And then from there, we'll help in ideating and generating, and then prototyping, and then solutioning. So if we dive deeper into this, the actual role of the product designer in the product process kind of aligns to these activities and deliverables for each of the steps or phases. So in discovery, we're really collaborating with the product owners to define and support the strategy and definition of that problem space. And that could be anything from a product audit, maybe running a problem framing workshop, to if you have an idea and of a problem, but you're not quite sure what to do or what sort of ideas you have, then we can help you facilitate a innovation workshop where we'll look at a methodology in ideating and coming up with new ideas. We can also help in looking at competitive analysis or customer research and definition. That's where we will kind of focus on in the discovery space. Then when we move into more of the definition space, in this phase, we kind of come together to put a little bit more frames around the idea and help to support the product owners through the MVP process or road mapping process. And this is where we'll run design sprint workshops, which you may have learned from TL in the past talk. We'll also do journey mapping. And let's say, for example, you have an existing product and you're looking for us to kind of validate or explore kind of whether that product is good, or we can run a UX assessment, we can do heuristic evaluations. And then we also kind of support in the process of road mapping, product road mapping workshops, as well as like feature documentation. But this is where, you know, there's a little bit of a gray line between product owners and product designers, but more it's a collaboration. I think both have very important skills, and really where the highlight of the product designer is really in the design process. This is where we'll actually get to do the things that make us really happy. Not to say that the whole process doesn't make us happy, but this is our specialty. We are looking at information architecture, we are wireframing, we are visually problem solving, we're also customer experience problem solving. And that's where we also kind of jump into like prototyping, usability testing, and of course, accessibility, which is important, and inclusivity. And that kind of leads us to the very final piece, which is delivery. And once we've kind of produced or designed the product, the next phase of it is really making sure that the collaboration between the product designer and the product and the developers goes smoothly. So that means we're building out style guides and pattern libraries. We're supporting in design QA and UX review, as well as a constant design and usability support as each release happens. And then as we go, we also monitor, track, and measure product quality post-launch. So that could be A/B testing, that could be usability testing afterwards, making sure that performance times are good, tasks are measured properly. And then that becomes a continuous iteration of customer feedback and design kind of iteration. So as you can see, we're kind of all over the process. And what I want you to kind of take away from this is that each of these steps are needed for the next piece. And no matter where you come in at each of these processes, design can provide you with the right tools and the right kind of next steps to kind of get you to that next phase. Then if we look at some of the team scenarios of what sometimes our pods can kind of look like, or if you have a certain team already. I wanted to kind of break down what you would likely get if you didn't have the other type of role. So let's say, for example, you're a product owner and a developer. What are the scenarios that you'll end up with? So you'll be able to build the product, which is great. It'll likely work because you've got a developer, and that's cool. But the key missing piece here is, will people be able to use it? Is there adoption? Have we considered that you're solving the right problems or solving it for the right people? And that's where a designer can kind of help facilitate those answers, getting those answers. For sure, product owner could definitely help in that space, but the design piece, the visuals, the experience, that's where it's missing. And then let's say, for example, you have a team with a UI designer. This is where, yeah, you may have a product that works. It will likely look good. But the question is like retention. Have you considered the overall experience or defined that core flow that makes sure that you've considered everything and that it's the best approach? Because really you're mostly, for the UI designer, you're mostly solving for visual experience, visual layouts, those types of things, and less so the UX responsibilities. So the next pod is more of the UX designer. If you have that person on your team, you can build it, people will use it. It may or may not look pretty depending on the skill of your UX designer. And what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to define who your users are and how to use the tool. It may or may not be visually lacking. I think you could probably get away with having a UX designer. I'm sure that most UX designers are also visual designers. So in the end, it works out fine. And then the last piece is having that product owner, developer, product designer. You can build it, people will be able to use it. You'll get a little bit of everything to launch your product. You can probably build faster, and that's kind of where it's aligned with like that agile process of launch fast, fail fast, that type of mentality, but you won't get that same level of depth that you would if you were to kind of build in a team that has all those skills brought in. So the key thing I would like you to take away from this is that no matter what, you should have a designer on your team, because they will help you in a lot of ways that you may or may not be able to address solely as a product owner or a developer or whatever type of role that you have at that moment. And if you lean too much towards development, you have usefulness, but you have function, but you don't have usefulness. If you lean too hard towards the business, then you lose sight of those users and their needs. But also on the other side of it, if you lean too much on design, you'll end up with a product that has all the vision and all the experience, but then you're missing that business and feasibility piece that sometimes we just need to be reeled in a little bit to make sure that we don't just blue sky everything, because we do want to launch a product that is feasible to launch. So in a perfect world, the roles themselves will have a bit of harmony. They will have some give and take in each of the processes and will make sense at the appropriate time. So that's something to consider, is that they all work together to produce a good product, and that you can't lean solely on one single role to facilitate that. So in a perfect world, in a perfect pod, plus or minus a few people, because there are a bajillion people on the team, but in my mind, the perfect pod has a stakeholder, a product owner, product designer, as well as supporting members, which are the UX designers and UI designers, UX researcher, which is kind of key to the whole process as well. Part of that role of the UX researcher is to make sure that we are validating and testing at each phase. It can be a bit of an effort, it could be less of an effort, but the role of that researcher is to make sure that we are always focused on the goal, which is to build a product for a specific person, and also to anticipate their needs and their wants. So in this space, we have the appropriate roles to support. You'll see that the product designer makes sure that things are holistic and make sure that the designers are communicating across each other, and that there is always a level of collaboration between product owner, stakeholder, and product designer with the rest of the team. So this is my vision of what I think a perfect team is, but it could change, it could be adjusted. The important thing is to make sure that you have those skill sets at the right time. So what does good product design look like? Good product design is invisible. So if you think about it, a good product is something that is ideally intuitive, and the use of it, the use of the product, users can intuitively use the product as needed because the product team has understood their needs and anticipated their usage. I like to think about it from the perspective of hospitality or the restaurant space, where a good experience in there is them anticipating that I need water, or that I want something before I need it. Or when you check into a hotel, like there are things done for you before you even know. I think that's what I like to kind of compare good product design with in the real world. An example of a good product is potentially an iPad. So if you think about it, an iPad could be used by somebody who is 2 years old to 75 years old. The actual interactions and the device itself is very intuitive. Swiping, tapping, those are all very simple interactions. And it's very easy, and there's no friction in how people access it. So I think that's a really good example of what a good design product is. The actual apps themselves are very dependent on, like the experience of the apps themselves are dependent on the app, but the actual tool itself is a good way of gauging. Like if a 2-year-old or a 75-year-old can use your product, that's a great design. And then if you think about it from a digital practice perspective, good design within products are continual feedback from the system, making sure that your users and customers, they know where they're at and they know how to get out of trouble if they get into trouble. It's also affordance, making sure that things are findable, that people aren't kind of going in circles. And I could do a whole talk on what good design looks like, or what the types of heuristics that we follow, but it's really important to just, maybe I'll do that next year, but it's just important to remember that good design is kind of anticipating the user's needs. And then on the other side of that is like, what is bad design then? Bad design are those like dark UX patterns that sometimes come out, where, let's say, for example, an airline, or when you're booking something on a travel space, there are kind of those like extra pieces to your travel, and it often like costs extra money or something like that, and they default it to on. That type of thing is a dark pattern. Like you don't want that, because users tend to want to get through these types of things quickly, and then when you do it as a default, then you're kind of taking advantage of people's want to kind of get through that process. And that's not really something that is a great approach. It doesn't make the experience better. It also just kind of makes you look like a skeevy kind of app. So I challenge you to kind of think about where your best experiences have been. What are those good product designs that you've engaged with? Or even think about what a negative experience looks like to you, or what a negative product how has it impacted you? And maybe we can kind of talk about that after. And that's kind of the end of my talk, but let's revisit those assumptions that we had at the beginning of the talk. I said talk like 3 times. Anyway, so designers just make things look pretty. This one we know is false, because yes, designers do make things look pretty, but behind that, there are a lot of theories. There's Gestalt laws, there is visual design principles, content hierarchy. There's actually a lot of consideration that goes into creating a layout, which I really didn't talk about, but I just want to say that it's not just a pretty design. There's actually a lot of principles that come behind that pretty design. And it just happens that also looks really dope. And then on the other side of that, we also run workshops. We do research, we do wireframes, we do prototyping. So yeah, designers make things look pretty, but they also do a whole ton of other things. So that one's false. This one, we don't need a designer. Our developers can design and code at the same time. This is the developers can definitely design and code, but you do need a designer to kind of give that perspective and to advocate for the users. Developers are great, and I'm sure there are some developers that are also really great kind of designers as well, but you want to make sure that you have that foundation of understanding your personas, understanding your journeys before you even get to coding. And that's an important part of mitigating risks in the future. We know all designers are not the same. There are a lot of different types of designers. They all have different skills and responsibilities. So this one is false. The important thing is to remember that getting the right designer in there and the right skill set will help you kind of achieve what you're trying to do in that phase. So yeah, all designers are not the same. Designers just slow things down. So I was listening to Mark's talk on actually I think it was the feature backlog workshop. And he said something like slow down to speed up. And I think that's a very good approach, because yes, the designers bring process into the overall product process. Yes, we do have a lot of pieces in there that may or may not take more or less time, because things are adaptable. But to me, we build in this process because that's how we mitigate risks in the future. The thing you do not want to do is you don't want to spend 6 months getting to MVP and launching only to find out that you didn't do your research, you didn't define who your personas are, define what you were trying to solve, and also test the experience before you launched. Because as soon as you get there, you've already spent a whole bunch of money. And if you have a designer, you can help to get those foundational pieces figured out. It'll take a little bit more time, but at a minimum, you'll be able to mitigate that risk in the future. So that's key. Designers have all the answer to things. This one is false. We wish we had all the answers to things. That would make things a lot easier in our lives. No, we do not have the answers to things, but what we do have are the tools and skills to help you find those answers. So when you go to a designer next time, just, for an answer, just know that they don't know everything, and they're likely just pulling out of their toolbox. And then all designers care about is the users. This one is false, because yes, we do care about the users, but the reason we care about the users is because we want to create an experience that will continue to be adopted and used. And when you get that type of experience, or you get that good product, it becomes a cycle of creating a product that works, creating something that hits your business objectives, which I'm hoping has something to do with making sure more people use your product and that it is a good experience, because good experience equals good business to me. The user needs to be advocated for, but yes, there is a balance of understanding what the business objectives are, what the user's objective is, and then also just kind of what the overall experiences are. So those three together, you need to kind of calibrate those toggles and make sure that it is appropriately kind of defined based on your objectives. But caring about the users is not bad business. Caring about the users is making sure that you are building a product that is for somebody and that is valuable to somebody. And that's really what will keep people coming back. And then the last one, designers are sensitive, magical unicorns that constantly need reassurance and support from others because deep down they're insecure and afraid people will just think they're making this all up. Yes, this is 100% true. I am talking right now, but in my experience, sometimes people get a little insecure. We're creatives. We are always trying to advocate for the things we do, because to a lot of people, it seems like magic. Like, do your magic. And we're like, there's not magic in here. It's actually a lot of process. It's a lot of methodologies. It's a lot of understanding of principles and those types of exercises that bring those things out. So yes, there will be times where designers are kind of insecure. And I think this kind of falls in line with pretty much everybody in any role, is that, you know, you're trying to do your job, but there's levels of insecurity that come with it. And who knows what anyone knows? Like, nobody knows anything. So in the end, you know, you follow the process, you follow the tools that you are used to, so that you're used to kind of build the product and have a successful launch. And yeah, designers are just a bunch of humans too. We just want to do we just want to build good products, want to create great experiences, and we want to collaborate with people that are also kind of care about the same things as well. So we've gone through the process of figuring out these are mostly false. And we already probably knew some of these were false, if not all of them were false, but it's good to kind of outline that. And yeah, so that kind of comes to the end of my talk, which is what I really kind of hope you got out of this talk, is that, you know, we've squashed some of these assumptions, and that it's not magic, and that it's actually just process and methodologies. That you've learned a little bit about what it means to be a product designer, and that you understand the differences between the various design roles, so that when you're building out your team, you know what to look for, and you know how and what skills come with the types of designers, and that you leave here with a better understanding of designers' role within the product lifecycle. And hopefully I've inspired you to think about how design and designers can elevate your product and achieve your product goals. In the end, really, what I wanted to do is to just demystify what we do as designers, and also help you build a team that makes sense for you, build a team that helps to launch that product that you're trying to build. And I was trying to think about who this audience was and what they would get out of it. And I was like, well, as a designer, at least you can kind of figure out the type of responsibilities you're going to need, or types of skills you're going to need to be a product designer. If you're a product owner, then you can kind of see, oh, these are the types of designers I need on my team, or this is the type of designer I want on my team. So based on budget and skills. And then if you're someone else, then I hope you learned something here as well. And that this was a good use of your lunch hour. This is my lunch hour, but anyway, but yeah, that's it. So I'll open it up to questions if you have any. Yeah.
Thanks, Thary. We don't have any questions right now, but really good reactions, claps, thumbs up, smiles. So I think everyone liked the content.
Great. All right then. Well, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.